This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we bring you part 2 of our conversation with a man who was held in solitary confinement longer than anyone in U.S. history for over 43 years until he won his freedom just over 3 years ago. Albert Woodfox is now traveling the world to discuss his new memoir. It's called Solitary: Unbroken by 4 decades in solitary confinement, my story of transformation and hope. In it, Albert describes his childhood, how his mother struggled to keep the family cared for, how as a young teen and young man he was in and out of jail and prison, and how he became radicalized when he met members of the Black Panther Party, and went on to establish the first chapter of the organization at the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola, Louisiana, to address the horrific conditions at the former cotton plantation. Not long after this, he and fellow prisoner Herman Wallace were accused in 1972 of stabbing prison guard Brent Miller to death. The 2 men always maintained their innocence, saying they were targeted because of their political activity. Woodfox, Wallace, and a third man, Robert King, became collectively known as the Angola Three. For decades, Amnesty International and other groups campaigned for their release. Well, after being held in isolation in a 6 by 9 foot cell almost continuously for 43 years, Albert Woodfox was released on his 69th birthday. That was February 19th, 2016, after he entered a plea of no contest to charges of manslaughter and aggravated burglary. He's joining us here in our New York studio to continue to discuss his remarkable new memoir, Solitary: Unbroken by 4 decades in solitary confinement, my story of transformation and hope. Thanks so much for staying to continue this conversation, Albert. When you got out of jail, the first thing you did was go to your mother's grave.
Yes.
When did she die?
She died in 94, December. And it had, it was
more than 20 years before you got out.
Yeah, it was in African American households, it is always coming to terms with the lost one of someone in the family, when you can say that final goodbye, when you can say from your heart and your soul, I love you and I'll miss you, but I'll never forget you. And so I was denied that right. I was denied the right to go to my mom's wake or funeral and say that final goodbye. So I had to live with that burden, until the day I was released from prison. And the same thing with my sister, when I lost my sister in 2002, both to cancer. And the lawyers had made arrangements for me to attend the funeral. But on the day that the sheriffs from Orleans Parish come to pick me up, Warden Kane canceled everything. And now this is a man who projected the image of being a Christian and believing in family and everything, but yet because of my political belief, because they couldn't break me, because I would never renounce the Black Panther Party as they demanded as a term from being released from solitary confinement, he saw another opportunity to inflict pain upon me, and so I was denied the right to say goodbye to my sister. And on the day I was released, we went straight to the graveyard, and the graveyard was closed because there had been a 2-hour delay in releasing me. I wanted to climb over the fence, and my brother was like, no, we're not having that. You just got out of prison. We're not going to, give these people. So we left with a deep heart, and we went and said goodbye to my sister and my brother-in-law, who was also a childhood friend. And the next day, with an abundance of flowers, we went. And I was finally able to lift that burden that I had carried for so long.
I wanted actually to go to your brother, who you remain close to, Michael Mabel.
Yes.
You remain close to him in prison. He was there to greet you upon you. I wanted to go to your brother, Michael Mabel, who you remain close to in prison and who was there to greet you when you got out in 2016. When you joined us days later on Democracy Now!, he was there too.
Yes.
And he described for us how on those first days after getting out, you visited your mother's grave.
It was closure for him. I periodically always visit my mother's grave. My mother took her last breath with me holding her hands, and I would always let him know how she went and how much, she continues to look down and know that he's going to struggle for the right thing in this world. And, him and King and Hooks have always given me strength to go against the world. And, no matter what happens, it's that if you continue hope and strength and you fight for a right cause, then you can do anything you want.
So that's Michael, your brother. That was just a few days after you got out. Our radio listeners can't see you sitting next to him. You actually look very different than you do today.
Well, I have more gray hair.
So I want to go back to your time in prison. It's amazing to me that rather than just leaving it all behind, it already consumed so many decades of your life. You are spending your life free, talking about what's happening inside. I think, to say the least, it's impossible for anyone who hasn't gone through this to understand what it means to live in a 6 by 9 foot cell for more than 4 decades. How did you maintain your sanity? Describe for us being in that cell, what it felt like.
Actually, the measurements of the cell are 6 by 9, 6 feet wide, 9 feet long. But there is actually less space available because you have 2 bunks attached to the wall that takes up half of the cell, and you have a toilet bowl, face bowl combination on the back wall, and you have a iron table with a bench on the thing. So you have a very narrow pathway in which you can move back and forth in the cell. When you first put in solitary confinement, you go through this period where you want to scream, because nothing you can do to fight this. In hindsight, I would say it was probably the earliest stage of claustrophobic, but depending on the individual, as time goes on, you learn to control your emotions, your feeling of being smothered and being confined, and so but then we first put this in solitary confinement. You could only have like 2 or 3 pair of underwear and a T-shirt, and you couldn't have books or radios or those things. Those things were gained later as a result of resistance and organizing and hunger strikes and stuff like it. That we won the right to change. What access did you have to reading material, to books? At that time, only a Bible. They had a Bible in each cell. But the thing was that so many other prisoners had gained respect for what we were trying to do, that they would actually take a chance and sneak us like newspapers and novels and books like it there. But as I said, over the decades, as a result of a resistance and court cases, filing cases in the court, we slowly began to expand what solitary confinement looked like. I wanted to go to why you were put in solitary confinement. You faced like a 50-year sentence for armed robbery, and you were expected to serve like half that time, so you would have been out decades ago. But while you were in prison at Angola, you were charged and convicted of murdering a guard Officer Brent Miller, yeah.
Brent Miller, along with Herman Wallace. You were two
and
of the
two
Angola
other
three.
guys, as to why they charged him, I have no idea.
You always believed they went after you because of your Black Panther activity. In watching documentaries about you, I remember this moment where Brent Miller's widow, Teenie, she's been identified in different ways, Teenie Rogers, Teenie Verrett, said she was convinced you couldn't have been, you and Herman Wallace were not the people who killed her husband. Before I ask you about your visit with her when you were released, I want to play a clip of Teenie. She was just 17 when her husband, Officer Miller, was stabbed to death in 1972. She was interviewed in a documentary in 2010 in the Land of the Free.
I've been living this for 36 years. There's not a year that goes by that I don't have to relive this. And it just keeps going and going. And then these men, I mean, if they did not do this, and I believe that they didn't, they have been living a nightmare for 36 years.
So that's Brent Miller's widow. She's talking while you were in jail, and you would be in jail for years to come after that. You actually visited her after you got out of prison? Yeah,
we had dinner together, our respect for Teenie Miller is unbound, because I took a lot of courage for her to do what she did, to come out. But in a sense, she was as great a victim as we were, because she had been lied to all this time about Brent's death. She had not been told about the bloody fingerprint that was identifiable, the scrapings from underneath his fingernails that didn't match. None of the physical evidence that they accumulated matched any of us, as particularly Harmon and I, to Brent Miller's death. And she had never been made aware of this. But in the process of our attorneys trying to build a defense for us, she was contacted and agreed to talk with, the investigators. And the investigators say that she was very shocked by some of the things that were being discussed. And so after, getting the facts, she came to the conclusion on her own that, Harmon and I was innocent. And she actually tried to visit us. Of course, they wouldn't let it happen, especially when Harmon was, had been diagnosed with liver cancer. She actually tried to go to Hunts and visit him. And of course, she was denied. And she was the victim of scorn and hate and everything from not only the prison security staff, but from Brent Miller's family as well, because, she did what the Miller family refused to do, and that was to look at the facts, look at the evidence.
So this is what got you in solitary confinement?
Well, his death, yeah. I was actually the very first person that was locked up and placed in the dungeon, and the next day transferred to CCR, which is solitary.
CCR stands for?
Closed Cell Restrictions. And so...
and, of course, you had founded the Black Panther Party chapter in Angola before that.
And this anti-slave, sex slave move we made.
And your whole movement against the raping of prisoners.
It caused us, we got a lot of enemies, And we found out later on that a lot of guys had gave statements and stuff, never accusing us directly, but, giving the impression that we were behind in some kind of way.
Albert, you wrote, "My proudest achievement in all my years in solitary was teaching a man to read."
Yes.
How did you do that, and who was this man?
Well, his name was Charles, and we became good friends. And since, you know, my mom couldn't read or write anything but her name, you know, there's certain things, people that can't read or write, certain techniques they use and stuff. And so I picked this up on him. And, you know, the CCR, the cell block, is 15 men to a cell. And the uniqueness about, I guess, in Louisiana, the front of the bar cell is made out of bars. It's not a completely concrete enclosed cell. So I just asked him one day, I said, man, you know, don't get mad, but, you know, can you read or write, you know? And he said, you know, no, I can't. And I just told him, I said, well, I can help you learn how to read and write, but you got to really want it. You got to want this better than anything. And so I use a dictionary, starting off, you know, and dictionaries at the bottom of each page. There's a sound key on how you pronounce words as to how they spell, you know, and I taught him about, you know, vowels and adjectives and, you know, just basically, you know, and show him, you know, teach him how to shape words, and he really wanted it, you know, because I told him, I said, you know, anytime, I don't care what night or day, you hit a wall, you call me, and he's called me 2 and 3 in the morning, you know, and I can't pronounce this word, so I would ask him to spell it. And then I'd remind him of, you know, the voice key at the bottom of the page and how you pronounce, you know, alphabets as, you know, and help him, you know.
He was in solitary, too.
Yeah, he was about 3 or 4 cells down from me.
How do you communicate? How did you communicate with other people in solitary?
Well, you talk, howl up and down the chair, you know. This is one of the way I developed the habit of waking up in the very early, you know, a.m. because the tears stop showering. There's no noise. The doors are not opening and closing. And, you know, so you are able to really concentrate on what you're doing. So even now, you know, I wake up 3:30, you know, in the morning, you know, and this is when I do most of my I still try to read at least 2 hours a day. So there's some things, habits that I developed in prison I still try to hold on to.
Well, you're a busy man once you've gotten out of prison, and now on your book tour, you're headed to Canada, and you have to leave in a few minutes. But I wanted to ask you about how you have adjusted since getting out of prison. Starting with the small things, you write about this in a very graphic way. Even the use of your hands. Explain.
Well, in solitary confinement, every time you leave your cell, you put in restraints. And they usually restrain your hands to your front of your body or on the side. And so you don't have free access, you know. It's and some humans than others, you know, hand expressions when you talk and you move your hand. So, you know, have my hands strapped to my stomach or to my side for, you know, 4 decades. When I was released... in
solitary, you're not shackled.
Well, every time you leave the cell, anytime you leave a cell in solitary, you put in restraints, you know. So my first encounter without having restraints is when I was placed in 98 in the Amid City Jail. No, rather 96 when I discharged. And they don't use restraints there. And I just didn't know what to do with my hands. You know, I didn't know. Actually, there was a time when I used to keep my hands folded in front of me because of the comfort. You know, I'd done this, lived with this for so long, you know, it was a comfortable position. Yeah, so I would actually... Almost
as if you were shackled.
Yeah. I would cross my, you know, intertwine my fingers and hold them, you know, to my stomach. And when I got out, I felt very uncomfortable when people moving around me, because in CCR you only had to defend the front of your cell because you had 2 walls and the back, so no one could get around you. And so when I was going to community events and stuff like it there, you know, people have a tendency to read about you and they actually start feeling like they know you. So people would come up, you know, and they would pat me on the shoulder or on the back. Some would even bear hug me. And it took all the discipline that I had developed in the decades of solitary not to just explode, you know, because, you know, to have someone come up behind you, you know, in prison, that is deadly. You know, you spend a great deal of time in prison trying not to let anyone get behind you, you know, because most attacks in prison, that's where they come from behind. And so that was probably my biggest adjustment, you know, getting accustomed to people moving all around me and people coming up behind me and patting me on the back and stuff.
And what about walking? When your hands are shackled, your legs are also shackled,
yes.
right?
Yes.
So how did it feel to be able to walk freely?
Well, at first you measure your steps, just like, you know, when you have shackles on, you can only step so far. So when I first got out, I would take, like, I guess you could use the term baby steps, you know.
Sort of shuffling.
Yeah. And over a period of time, you know, you adjust, you know. And one of the reasons I think that helped me survive is I had developed the ability to adjust very quickly. So whenever things change, you know, rather than resist, which most people do, because change means unfamiliarity and stuff, you know, I would adjust to that change almost instantaneously. And so, you know, that pretty much, you know, how I learned, or I had, you know, I guess you can use the term, I learned how to walk again, you know. And
you also talk about your hands, not only where you place them, but how you use them. Like, for example, using a cell phone and what it meant for your fingers to be working in a different way.
Yeah, you know, like I say, you pretty much have to learn a new physical way of moving and doing things when you've been shackled for 4 decades plus, you know.
Are you suing over your confinement, solitary confinement, for over 4 decades?
In 2001, Herman, Robert, and I filed a suit challenging long-term cell confinement.
Herman Wallace, Robert King, and you, the Angola Three.
Unfortunately, the conditions of the suit, I can't comment any further than that. But
it's in process now.
No, it was settled. It was settled, you know. But part of the conditions was keep your mouth shut, you know. But I can say that there have been some changes, you know, not nowhere near what they should, because solitary should be ended. You know, the purpose of solitary confinement is to destroy human spirit, to destroy, you know, sense of self-worth, to destroy your sanity, you know. And so, you know, it serves no purpose. It's still very used very heavily, you know, in the prison systems across this country, you know. So you know, in certain states now, right, including New York, are considering limiting solitary confinement. But you know, and maybe this is because I know the horrors of solitary confinement. I've heard terms like, you know, no longer than 15 days, and you know, for me, 1 day in solitary confinement is too much. You know, so I understand that stuff changes gradually, you know. So this is a progressive move. I support, you know, the effort out there to end solitary or to severely limit its use. What the end goal is to end the use of it altogether, you know.
Albert, you write, if there's a moral to my story, it's that salvation comes with the will to be a better human being. You say you wouldn't change your life because everything made you the man you are today. Yeah,
you know, that's one of the questions I've been asked a lot. What would I change, you know? And without thought, you know, I say I wouldn't change anything, because everything that happened to me helped me become the human being I am now, the man I am now, you know.
You also write, it has been my experience that because of institutional and individual racism, African Americans are born socially dead and spend the rest of their lives fighting to live.
Yes, I think that's apparent in this country, and even more so now. We have a president who has openly admitted that he's a white supremacist. So yeah, I don't think, one of the things when I got out, people would ask me, well, what about the change? But I didn't sense a change. At least I'll say this: I didn't sense a deep-rooted change. The change in America was superficial. And I thought it was pathetic that the same conditions that I left in society almost 50 years still exists. Racism had put on a shirt and a tie and a jacket, and codes were used rather than the blatant in-your-face type of racism that I had faced in my youth. But it was still the same.
What did having the first African-American president of the United States, Barack Obama, mean to you?
On a personal level, of course, being African-American, there was a certain pride. But politically, realistically, I didn't think it would be any different from any other president. The political system in this country is built, and the culture go back for hundreds of years. And I've seen it time and time again. Politicians go to D.C. with the best of intentions, but they are overwhelmed, and eventually they become just another politician. So, I figured Mr. Obama would do things differently, but I didn't think the end results would be any different,
You're fine. Go ahead.
No, and I think, in my personal opinion is that the first 4 years of his presidency was wasted, because he truly believed in partisan politics and reaching across the aisle and try to form a consensus. And the Republican Party stated that they would spend the next 4 years making sure that his presidency failed. So.
Your final thoughts as you go out into the world now to Canada. The weekend of May 4th and 5th, you'll be in Berkeley at the Bay Area Book Festival as you travel the world, taking advantage of every moment in the free world.
Well, my hope has always been, for a better humanity, and to try to be a part of that, to try to say something or do something that will make, if no more than one human being, stop and think, and start a dialogue that can change into a movement. I've always said that one individual can cause chaos, mass movements can cause change. So I still firmly believe in that, and so that's Robert and I and Harmon. We were in prison. The one thing we always noticed is that we didn't have a voice, and because of the men and women and children that were hid behind the walls of prison and in solitary, nobody knew what we looked like. So we had made a vow that we would be the voice of those men and women and children, and we would be the face. I think what people in America and around the world have to realize, that prisoners don't come from another planet. They come from your family. They come from homes, and they might make mistakes. Usually the economic system brings the pressure. And, I know that there's a very small percentage of human beings who do some horrible things, but the overwhelming majority, you come from a family. You don't come from an alien planet. And they need to remember that, and they need to love them and support them, because prisons are all, any state institution, without oversight and without consequences, unchecked power corrupts. And that's the situation you have in prisons in this country.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being with us. Albert Woodfox, the longest-standing solitary confinement prisoner in the United States, held in isolation in a 6-by-9-foot cell almost continuously for 43 years, released in 2016, 3 years ago, has just published his memoir, Solitary, Unbroken by 4 Decades in Solitary Confinement, My Story of Transformation and Hope. To see part 1 of our conversation, go to democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.